Hi everybody, it's Miss Lorette again. So we're going to be continuing section 2.1 in this lesson. This is lesson 5, multiplying and dividing without a calculator. So because this is without a calculator, it might be a little bit longer than the last video because we're going to be doing things the old-fashioned way. Hopefully these are all skills that you've learned at some point in middle school. We're going to be focusing on just integers and decimals. So let's jump right into it. So you'll want something to write with and something to write on, but no calculator this time. So go ahead and pause this video if you need to copy this example down, and then I'll walk you through. So I'm going to draw a line down the equal sign, just like last time. I just like putting that visual sometimes. And when I look at the side that has the variable, a number is touching it, that means multiplication. I want to do the inverse to isolate, so I'm going to divide. P is now alone. I bring down my equals, and now since I'm not using a calculator, I have to actually do this using long division. So I'm going to draw a long division symbol that looks something like this. The numerator value goes on the inside. Some teachers refer to this as in the house. This is also called the dividend. So 360 is our dividend. The denominator of 18 goes on the outside just to the left. Some teachers refer to this as at the door. This is also called our divisor. If you notice, I'm ignoring the negative for right now, and that's because if you recall in long division, at some parts throughout the long division, you subtract. I don't want that negative throwing me off. So I always ignore negative signs when I'm doing long division, and then when I get my final quotient, I adjust for the sign if necessary at the very end. So when we're doing a long division, you're trying to see how many times can that divisor go into that dividend. So I always start with the smallest number I see. Now, obviously, if I start with the smallest number and I just look at the 3, 18 can't go into 3. It's too small. So I have to look at the 36 first. 18, I'm trying to figure out how many times can 18 go into 36 without going over. So I'm trying to get as close as I can without going over. This may require a little guess and check where you multiply 18 with various numbers. Now I know 18 actually goes into 36 2 times evenly, but if you didn't know that, again, you would just do some guess and check. Now when I write my answer of 2, I'm writing it right above the 6. It's always above the rightmost number in the value that you just divided. So the rightmost number in the value we just divided was the 6. That's where I'm going to write my 2 above. Okay, so then I take these two values, the 2 and the 18, I multiply them together to get 36, and that product is written below the number I just divided, and then I subtract them. Here, 36 minus 36 just gives me 0, so that works out nicely. Now if you notice, I still have a 0 in my dividend. That 0 has to come down for the ride, and then I keep going. I divide it. 0 divided by 18, 0 divided by any number is 0. So I'm going to write 0 as part of my quotient, and I do the same thing. I multiply the 0 and the 18 to give me 0, and I subtract the two numbers. 0 minus 0 is just 0. So there's no remainder and there's no more numbers left in my dividend to divide. So 20 is my answer, but as I mentioned before, I always go back and I double check the signs in case I need to adjust. The 360 was positive, the 18 was negative. Different signs give you a negative when you divide. So I need to adjust the sign of my answer. It's a little crooked, there we go. That's better. Okay, so to just kind of recap long division, if it's been a while since you've done it, what you do is you divide. So you divide first, then you multiply, and then you subtract, and you keep going if you need to. Divide, multiply, and subtract. Let's take a look at this next example. Oops. On the side that contains my variable, I see division. I want to do the inverse, so I'm going to multiply. I'm going to multiply both sides by 15. And to do this without a calculator, I stack the numbers. The number with the most digits goes on top, and the number with the fewest digits goes on the bottom, and I align the rightmost values when I stack them. In this case, it's the same number, so it doesn't really matter which one you put on top. And the way that you multiply the old-fashioned way is you start at the bottom right, and you multiply this bottom right number with each number at the top, right to left. So I'm going to start with the 5 and multiply it with the 5 on top. I get 25, but I have to carry the 2 because I'm not done multiplying. Anytime you get a double-digit number, you carry that other number. And then I keep multiplying with the bottom 5. 5 times 1 gives me 5, and then I add the 2 last, and that gives me 7. So every time you have a number that you've carried, you'll multiply first and then add. Now I'm not done. I still have to multiply with these ones, or with this 1 here. So every time that you have to keep going, you have to add a row. And for each new row, you add an additional 0. So I'm going to add 1 0 because this is one new row. And now I keep going. 5 times 1, again, when we multiply with those top numbers, we always move right to left. So 5 times 1 gives me 5. 1 times 1 gives me 1. I'm done multiplying all the numbers. So now to get my final answer, I add these 2 rows of numbers. 5 plus 0 gives me 5. 7 plus 5 gives me 12. And I carry the 1. 1 plus 1 gives me 2. So V equals 225. And again, always double check the signs of your answer. I was multiplying a positive with a negative. That gives me a negative product. Here's my final answer. Okay, so again, pause the video if you need to. Anywhere you need more time to copy examples, when we're ready, I'll go ahead and walk you through. So I look at the side that has the variable. I see multiplication, so I want to divide. So it's going to be kind of similar to the first example that we did, where we divided integer values. The only difference is now we've got a decimal. Decimals aren't much different from integers. We just have to make a slight adjustment. So to start, it's going to look exactly the same way. I'm going to draw a long division symbol. My numerator is going to go in the house. In other words, it's my dividend. The denominator goes at the door. In other words, it's my divisor. And the only thing that's different here is we have to make some adjustments with our decimal point. When you're dividing with decimals, if your divisor, the number at the door, has a decimal point in it, we have to move it to the right however many times it takes until it becomes a whole number. So I'm just going to change the color here so you can really see that. So I'm going to take this decimal point and move it to the right, and I only need to do that once to make it a 4. You follow the leader in the dividend. When I look at my dividend of 1, I don't see a decimal point. There's an invisible decimal point in all integers and whole numbers just to the right. So I have to first add the decimal point and then move it. Any empty space requires a 0. It might be a good idea to rewrite your long division so it looks a little more clear. So now instead of being 1 divided by 0.4, it's actually 10 divided by 4. And again, there's that invisible decimal that we ended up moving all the way to the right. So I'm just going to divide just like last time. If I look at the smallest value, that's a 1. Well, 4 can't go into 1, so I have to look at the entire 10. 4 goes into 10 twice, so I'm going to write that 2 above the rightmost value in the number I'm dividing, so I have to write it above the 0. And then I multiply the 2 with the 4, and that gives me 8. I subtract and get a difference of 2. And since I have a remainder, I actually have to keep going, but my dividend doesn't have any more numbers. In order to keep going, I simply add a 0, and I bring that 0 down. And you can do this as many times as you need to until you're finished dividing. 4 goes into 20 evenly 5 times, so my 5 goes in my quotient. I multiply the 4 and the 5 together to give me 20, so I write that underneath the number I was dividing, and then I subtract them. I get a remainder of 0, so I'm done dividing. To figure out where my decimal point goes in my final answer, all I do is I take the decimal point in my dividend, and I just bring it straight up into my quotient. So you're just bringing it straight up. So I get 2.5 as my final answer, and then I double check the signs back in my original work here to see if I need to adjust. I had a negative, which I was dividing by a positive. That should give me a negative. So since we're doing things without a calculator, it's really important to make sure you're taking your time and you're double checking your work, and if need be, doing a check at the very end. Okay, here's another problem that has a decimal. Go ahead and copy this one down in your notebook and I'll walk you through. I see division, so the inverse is to multiply. I'm going to multiply both sides by 0.8. They're going to cancel on the left, leaving me with the x. And just like when we multiplied the integers together, it's going to be very similar when I multiply the decimals. I kind of ignore the decimal point and I treat them as integers. The number that has the most digits will go on top. The number with the fewest digits goes on the bottom. Here, they both have 2 digits, 3.1 and 0.8. So it doesn't matter which one I put on the top or the bottom. I'm just going to do it like this. And I multiply as if they're integers. So for now, I just ignore the decimal points. So I do it exactly like I did before when I did 15 times 15. 8 times 1 gives me 8, so I'm starting with that bottom right number and multiplying with the tops right to left. 8 times 3 gives me 24. For each additional row, I have to add an additional 0. So if I want to keep going to multiply with the 0, I'll add a 0. Now you don't have to do this step because 0 times anything will give you 0, but just to show you for the example, I'm going to multiply everything out. 0 times 1 gives me 0, 0 times 3 gives me 0, and then I'm done. I can add everything together. Well, 8 plus 0 gives me 8. All of these numbers plus 0 will just be whatever number we started with. So I can just bring them straight down. And then once you have that final number, that's when you adjust for the decimal place. To figure out where the decimal goes in your answer, you're going to look at all the values that you multiplied and you're going to count how many numbers to the right of the decimals did we have in total. Well, I had 1 here and I had 1 here. So I had 2 numbers in total to the right of the decimal. So I need to adjust for 2 decimal places. You'll always start at the rightmost value. So start by putting a decimal point all the way to the right, and then you move to the left that many times as we counted. So we needed to adjust for 2 decimal places, so I'll move 2 places to the right. 1, 2. That's where my decimal will go in my final answer. So instead of 248, it's going to be 2.48. And again, double check the signs of your numbers. I had all positives here, so same signs when you multiply give you a positive answer, so no need to adjust the sign of my answer here. Okay, so here are 4 practice problems for you to try on your own. So go ahead and pause this video, try all 4 of them. then unpause the video when you're ready to review the solutions. Okay, so hopefully you've given those a go. I'm just going to walk you through those solutions now. So for this first one, you should have divided both sides by 6. I'm just going to do my long division down here at the bottom. Again, I'm going to ignore the signs until the very end. So 6 is my divisor, 174 is my dividend. 6 can't go into 1, but it can go into 17. 12 is the closest I can get, so I need to multiply it with a 2 and subtract. Their difference is 5. I bring down the 4, and 6 goes into 54 evenly 9 times. I can't show the subtraction because I've run out of space, but you can clearly see that if I subtracted those two numbers, I would get 0. So 29 is my quotient, and you should have got a negative. There's my final answer for that one. Okay, next problem, you should have multiplied both sides by 11. I'm gonna do my work down at the bottom again, so I've got a little more space. So I'm gonna stack my two numbers here. Let me actually move that to the center a little bit so I've got a little more space. There we go. So I get 9 and 1, drop a 0, 9 and 1. I'm gonna have to move it up a little bit so I'll shrink it a little bit too, so I can add my values together here. So I get 9, 10 carry the 1, and 2. So you should have gotten for your product a positive 209. Next problem, you should have divided both sides by negative 0.2. I'll most likely have to shrink a little bit for this one too to get everything to fit. I have to do long division here. The 6 goes in the house, in other words, it's the dividend, and the 0.2 goes at the door. And again, notice how I'm ignoring the signs when I do this. So 0.2 is my divisor. I'm going to move the decimal point in that divisor to the right until it's a whole number. I have to add a decimal point to the 6 so that I can follow the leader. So this ends up becoming, I can shrink this a little bit, this ends up turning into 60 divided by 2 instead of 6 divided by 0.2. 2 goes into 6 3 times with no remainder. I bring down that 0. 0 divided by 2 is just 0 with no remainder. So you should have gotten, whoops. Let me just move this out the way a little bit so I can write my answer nice and clear. You should have gotten 30 as your quotient. And it is positive here. A negative divided by a negative, which is what we had when we did this problem, those two negatives made a positive. And the last problem, you should have multiplied both sides by 1.3. I'm going to do my work down here at the bottom. They're both 2-digit numbers, so it doesn't matter which one I put on the top. 15 carry the 1, 9 plus 1 gives me 10. I drop a 0 to keep going. 1 times 5 gives me 5, 1 times 3 gives me 3, and now I add. I get 5, 5, 4 as my sum. Let me shrink it just a little so I can move it a tiny bit. And then I have to adjust for 1, 2 decimal points. So I start at the right and I go, whoops, I go 1, 2 spaces to the left. So I get 4.55 and it should be a negative. Make that a little more clear so you can see it. Let me put the negative first. Negative 4.55, and that's my final answer, okay? And that is my last slide. So that pretty much wraps up this lesson. Again, If you were confused on anything, I encourage you to go back and re-watch parts of this video. Doing stuff without a calculator for long division and multiplication can be a little tricky. Khan Academy is a great resource to visit if you need extra practice with those things. Be sure to ask your teacher any clarifying questions, and that pretty much wraps it up. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye.